And welcome back to the show. Advocates for Children of New York recently released a new policy brief documenting the pandemic's heavy reality on the toll of school attendance for students living in homeless shelters. Now, the policy is calling on New York City Department of Education to direct federal COVID-19 relief dollars to overhaul the education support system in shelters, starting with hiring 150 shelter-based DOE community coordinators. Joining us now to tell more details is the bilingual case advocate of the learners in the temporary housing project at the Advocates for Children of New York, Anasofia Trelles. And thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And so as we look at this here, certainly children, and particularly in shelters, we didn't really necessarily pay particular attention during this pandemic, but I know it's front and center for the work that you do. So let us know a little bit about your findings.
Yeah, so our report shows that students in shelter particularly had significantly lower rates in attendance last academic school year, particularly during the months of January through June. They had lower attendance rates than any other student group. And depending on the month, the attendance rate trailed 11 to 14 percentage points behind permanently housed students. Our report also shows that the attendance rates for students at the high school level who are in shelter is actually significantly worse than other students. So 10th graders living in shelter missed more than 1 out of 3 days in the winter and spring of last school year, and 9th, 11th, and 12th graders were absent well over a quarter of the year.
And so when we look at this, obviously some startling statistics there. As these numbers become more and more available, what's the reaction been like?
Yeah, I mean, this is alarming. This is not something that we take lightly, and I think more attention needs to be focused on this. And this is not a new issue, which is the more concerning part, is that the pandemic definitely exacerbated some of the issues for students in shelter, but they are not new. So barriers to attendance have been an issue for the last 2 academic school years, and we've actually seen some archives that talk about how this is an issue for several years now.
So Anasofia, given this information and what we have and what we know, where do we go from here?
So we're calling on the Department of Education to hire 150 community coordinators based in shelter to address some of the barriers to attendance for students and families in shelter. So they would be working directly with families to provide supports like special education supports, transportation, connecting them with after-school programming, mental health services, just to make sure that students are attending school regularly and don't have any outstanding educational needs.
Yeah. And so when we look at students in shelters, obviously there were a lot of challenges they have pre-pandemic. Has the pandemic itself really further exacerbated this?
Yeah, so when we look at the reports, we definitely see a slight difference between students who were attending school remotely and in person. So students who were just attending school remotely had a slightly less attendance rate than students who were hybrid. But like I mentioned, this is not a new issue. And it's just, even this year when students are all in person, we're still seeing that students in shelter have lower attendance rates than their permanently housed peers.
So when you talk about the fact that you're calling for increased funding, that money coming from the federal government and other institutions, what's the response been like as you continue to raise the alarm?
Yeah, so we're thankful that the Department of Education has been receptive to our past policy asks. So they did hire more shelter-based social workers, but it's not enough. And so we're really asking that, especially in the wake of the pandemic, that there needs to be additional support and that students in shelter have access to somebody on site to help them with their educational needs.
So as we look around, we see a lot of people who are saying, today is the day that we really need to be paying more attention to really getting the word out and getting the word out in regards to those people who've been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know that when it comes to students in shelters, obviously they're at the forefront right now as virtue of this conversation. How do you see things really playing out over the course of the school year right now, given the fact that we're back into this educational learning environment and the way to go?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we're still seeing the similar trend of chronic absenteeism for students in shelter. So we know that in the beginning of the school year, students in shelter had a lower attendance rate than students who are permanently housed. It was about 73% compared to 87% of students attending citywide. We know that this is an issue that continues to persist. And part of that is because there are so many barriers to attendance. We know that, there were many issues with transportation at the start of the school year, and just many other issues that continue to persist.
So for you, what does your work consist of now that you're continuing to really lay the groundwork for a case to be made that there's this need out there? Where does your work take you now?
So Learners in Temporary Housing, our project at Advocates for Children, really does direct casework. So we work directly with families who are being affected by some of these barriers to attendance and help escalate those cases. We also do policy advocacy. So we are very interested in continuing to share some of these data points and urge the city to really, again, hire these community-based coordinators and just continue focusing on the education of students in temporary housing, because without access to a quality education, they can't break the cycle of poverty and homelessness.
Yeah. Do you see things getting better on the horizon?
There's a new administration, there's new hope. So we're really hopeful that we can, spread the word and that change is coming.
Yeah, well, certainly for people who want more information now, what do they do in terms of supporting the work that you've got going on, particularly raising their voice in agreement with your advocacy?
Absolutely. So we actually have a info line that anybody can call. We operate Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So if there are any families who are experiencing any kind of educational issues, particularly families in shelter is what my project is interested in, but we do a range of services, so special education needs, services for English language learners. They can definitely feel free to call our info line and we can connect them with supports. Or we also get calls from folks who just want to know how to get involved, and we're happy to have those calls as well.
Anasofia Trelles, thank you so much for being with us here on Open and the work that you're doing and advocating for children in shelters. Thanks much.
Thank you so much.
All righty. We want our viewers to know if you want more information, visit the website at advocatesforchildren.org. And don't forget about them on Instagram and also on Twitter at AFC New York. We do have more show. Don't go anywhere. Open is coming up right after this.